The story begins as we see two demons being hunted, as a woman named Alexia chases after them. She hits one of them with her spear, but he manages to survive, and the demons jump off the mountain as one of them throws the spear back. But she's able to catch it, and she watches as they escape to the city. We meet a boy named Heron, as he mines for ore, and he goes to the city to sell it, but the merchant only gives 2 coins. He thinks it isn't enough, but the merchant tells him to be grateful that he's doing business with someone like him. Heron finds his mother Electra, and shows her the money, explaining that's all he could get, but she tells him not to worry, saying she'll find a way to make ends meet. People suddenly start running away, so Heron grabs a torch, and goes to see what's happening. Alexia arrives, telling them not to be afraid, as she explains that she's looking for demons, and she wonders if they saw anything. Heron says no, so she advises everyone to hide in their houses, since the demons have no mercy. After Alexia leaves, Heron hears something in the canal, so he approaches it, and he sees an old man who broke his leg. Heron's companion thinks he's drunk, and decides to leave him alone, but Heron helps him, recognizing him as Elias. They meet Electra, and Elias thinks they should leave him behind, because everyone's hiding from the demons. But they decide to help him, and Electra asks for water to clean the wound, so Heron goes to get water from the fountain. He fills the jug, but notices something floating, and he realizes it's a woman, so he tries to help her, but he realizes she's already dead. A demon suddenly attacks him, trying to drown him, but Heron manages to push him away. He pulls out a knife, but the demon disarms him and punches him away. He manages to grab the demon's arm, but the demon resists, so Heron throws him into a pillar. Heron starts to get tired, and the demon throws the pillar at him, so he tries to avoid it, but he ends up getting hit, and the pillar pins him to the ground. The demon charges at him, but is pierced by Alexia, who pushes him back, but he doesn't stop, and she falls off her horse. He lunges at her, but she draws her sword in time, and they start fighting, as she tries to cut his leg, but she realizes that his skin is too tough. She aims for the head, and she manages to injure his face, so she figures out how to defeat him, cutting the weaker parts of his skin. But he manages to grab her sword, and he throws her into the air, sending her crashing against a pillar. He throws her sword at her, but she blocks it, and Heron suddenly joins the fight, burning his face with a torch and causing him to fall into the water. She asks Heron if he's okay, but notices the demon's footprints, realizing he's headed to the village, so she goes after him with her horse. Alexia searches for the demon with her soldiers, and she sees a suspicious man, so she attacks him, throwing him to the ground. She inspects him, and they see a hole on his chest, along with a map, so she takes it, and the soldiers arrest him. A crowd gathers at the center of the town, and Heron and his mother arrive with Elias. Alexia warns everyone about the demons, saying they have supernatural powers. She decides to show them by burning the man, and the crowd watches as he begs her not to do this. But she pierces him, and his appearance changes, so the guards hold his chains, and Alexia stabs him, causing him to transform into a demon. He tells people to convert or die, and Heron can't believe this is happening. Alexia tells him that his cult renounced humanity and killed innocent people, but the demon explains that he didn't forsake anything, saying they're the superior beings, so they see humans as prey. She cuts off his head, as the other demon watches everything and flees. Heron takes Elias and Electra to their house, which is away from the city, and they gather around the fire, as Heron wonders how something like that can exist. Elias explains that to understand demons, they have to understand the history of the gods, back to the war against the giants. He reveals that at the beginning, the gods were able to defeat the titans, but as the last titan fell, he swore a curse on the gods, and his blood struck the sea, causing giants to appear. They waged war against the gods, who fought with everything they had, but they couldn't defeat the giants, and the war ended up in a stalemate, which lasted for ages. But one day, Zeus convinced 2 giants to join the gods, and Zeus coordinated the final attack, as the giants marched to face him. The gods prepare to take them on, but the giants are suddenly attacked from behind, realizing they have been betrayed. The gods take the chance, and all of them attack together, as the remaining giants try to resist, but they're easily defeated. Hephaestus creates a cauldron to use against the giants, and hands it to Hermes, who makes his way to the battlefield. Zeus orders him to collect their souls, imprisoning them in the cauldron as their bodies are thrown into the ocean. After the war, Hephaestus forges an automaton called Talos to protect the cauldron and ensure that the giants never return. Heron doesn't understand what this has to do with the demons, but Elias tells him to be patient and explains that years ago, a wave brought a dead giant to the surface. It was discovered by a man, and he touches it, but he ends up getting corrupted. People join him, swearing loyalty to him, and they start eating the giant's remains, transforming them into demons. Heron wonders why the gods would allow this, so Elias explains that adversity makes men greater, and they would be weak if the gods always solved their problems. He pulls a rabbit from his bag as a gift for helping him, and he asks Electra to make a stew. The soldiers burn the demon's body in the square, and Heron watches as Alexia approaches him, thanking him for his help. She explains that they found a map with the location of the demon's camp, and she invites him to join them. But he explains that he has no reason to protect the people because they turn their backs on him and his mother, so he decides not to join her. Heron goes to his cabin and starts packing his things, but Electra wonders what he's doing, so he explains that they must flee from the demons. She tries to explain that they can't leave, but he doesn't understand her, so she reveals that he's not a bastard, and she starts talking about his father, but is interrupted by angry people from the town. They think Electra is a demon because a dark cloud has been covering the city since she turned up, so they want to test her with fire. Heron draws a knife, and the merchant thinks he can't kill all of them, but he's determined to protect his mother. So the men hesitate, but the merchant forces them to attack, and Heron fights them, while Alexia watches from a distance. Heron puts up a good fight, but he gets overwhelmed, and the men start beating him up. But Electra tells them to stop, and she decides to burn herself to prove she's not a demon. Alexia appears, so they release Heron, and he runs to comfort his mother. After the incident, Elias talks to Heron, knowing he had a rough day. He thinks he should go with Alexia, and Elias agrees, saying he can't stay there forever. Elias explains that war is approaching, so they must prepare, and he advises Heron to climb to the top of the mountain, where he will find a rose bush that stands out. Elias tells him to dig beneath it, so that he can find the adamantine ore, which is needed to forge a powerful sword. So Heron begins his journey to the mountain, and Elias watches him go, but the god named Ares suddenly appears behind Elias. He approaches Elias, who wonders how Ares found him. We learn that Elias is actually the god Zeus, and Ares reminds him that they must not interfere with human matters, thinking Zeus is breaking his own rule. But he explains that he hasn't broken the rules, because he's just interacting with humans and not fighting for them. Ares wonders if the other gods would like to know about this, but Zeus warns him not to tell anyone. He wants to help Zeus, but he says he doesn't need help, saying humans must fulfill their destinies alone. Ares doesn't understand why he's helping Heron, thinking he isn't fit to lead the humans, but Zeus believes in him, thinking he has a great future ahead of him. We see the queen in labor, and she becomes desperate when a maid goes to inform the king, because she fears he'll kill her child. The baby is born, and is soon placed in her arms, but the king enters the room, so the women are frightened. He asks if it's a boy, and takes the baby from her, but as the king checks his eyes, he realizes that the baby has the same eyes as him, so he becomes happy. But the maid reveals that another baby is being born, and this one is stronger than the last. As the baby comes out, the king asks to see it, checking the eyes again, but he realizes it's different, thinking the child doesn't belong to him. So he pulls his knife, but an eagle suddenly arrives, pushing him back and saving the baby. One of the soldiers tries to attack it, but Heron suddenly wakes up, and he continues climbing the mountain until he reaches the top. He becomes exhausted, and he starts to wonder why he's even doing this, but he finds the bush Elias told him about, and he mines the adamantine. He shows up to Elias with the ore, but thinks it was a waste of time since it's not malleable, but Elias puts it in the fire and reveals that he knows the secrets. Heron draws a seal in the sand and asks Elias if he has ever seen that, so he reveals that it's the symbol of Corinth, and Heron mentions that he saw it in a dream. Elias explains that dreams can be deceiving, saying there are nightmares created from the fears of men by Phobeter and also illusions made by Phantasos to deceive and confuse people. Beyond them is Morpheus, the great god of dreams, who causes visions with truths, brought to remind people of what was forgotten. He tells him these three are the oniroi, and Heron thinks they sound worse than the gods. Meanwhile, Alexia continues searching for the demons, but she decides to set up camp. We see Heron setting a trap, thinking they're crazy for staying, while the villagers protect themselves inside their houses. He decides to ask his mother about his dream and how she was a queen in it, but wonders if it's possible, so Electra tells him it's true, saying it was a long time ago. Heron asks her what happened, so she says she was married to King Periander, and Heron recognizes him as the tyrant of Corinth. She had no choice but to marry him because it was an arranged marriage, but she reveals that after she was married, a god fell in love with her. In a flashback, we see an eagle flying, and it sees Electra bathing, so it flies to the palace and transforms into the king. He approaches Electra, giving her flowers, so she becomes confused, since the king's behavior is inconsistent, so she doesn't know what to expect from him. The king never treated her well, but Zeus gives her a necklace, saying he loves her, so she realizes that something's wrong. One day, Zeus appears as the king again, but she points a knife at him and demands he reveal who he is, knowing he's not her husband. So Zeus reveals his true form, and Electra is in shock, but he continues to be kind to her. In Olympus, Hera senses Zeus in his true form, realizing he's having an affair, so she becomes furious. The god Apollo sees this, so he runs to a mirror and warns his father about Hera, advising him to return immediately. So Zeus kisses Electra and returns to Olympus, while Apollo takes his place. Hera asks Zeus where he went, and he says he was with Poseidon, since a storm brought the body of a giant to the coast. She thinks the giants are too impulsive, and she confronts him, saying creatures that can't control their desires should be castrated. Apollo thinks Zeus really loves Electra, knowing his father has never shown his true form to a human before. He reassures her that he won't tell Hera, since he's also a bastard like her son, and Electra suddenly finds out she's pregnant. Hera starts spying on Electra, seeing her pregnant, as she prays to Zeus. She returns to Olympus furious, so she enters a dark temple and summons the help of the Oniroi. They appear in the king's dreams and tell him that he will have a son that doesn't belong to him, so the king swears that if Electra gives birth to a bastard, he will kill the baby. But we return to the moment Heron was born, and Zeus reveals his true form as he protects Heron from the guards. The king realizes that Zeus is the father, so he becomes furious and orders his guards to keep attacking. He tries to kill Heron, but Electra stops him, stabbing him in the eye, so he falls from the balcony and dies. The guards protect the king's heir, while Zeus protects Electra, and they teleport away. She explains that after the incident, Zeus hid them in the mountains and placed dark clouds so Hera wouldn't find them, and that's why the villagers think they're bad omens. Heron wonders what happened to his brother, so Electra reveals he was killed by the uncle seeking the crown. She thinks about this as she looks at her necklace, and her biggest regret is not protecting him. She apologizes for not telling Heron before, but he wants to know the name of the man who killed his brother. So she tells him to leave the past behind and look forward, since he's the son of Zeus. But this angers him, thinking about how Zeus didn't do anything to help them, and even Elias did more for them than Zeus. Electra thinks he doesn't understand, but Heron asks her who always helped them and gave them rabbits when they were hungry. She falls silent, so Heron realizes that Elias is his father, and he becomes furious, thinking Zeus is a coward for making her live like a dog, so he goes to the forge and remembers everything Elias told him. He takes the vase and breaks the furnace with it, but he sees a sword on the side. He picks it up, and it starts to glow, so he realizes it's the sword Elias was talking about, realizing it's a gift from Zeus. But he's still angry, so he throws it away, and it ends up getting stuck in a stone. We see Alexia in the camp, as she looks at the map, and thinks there might be something hidden, so she holds it up to the flame, revealing a hidden path. The soldiers wonder what she found, and ask if she can read the text on the map, but she reveals that she can't understand it, thinking her old mentor Chiron might be able to explain it to her. She suddenly notices that they're surrounded by a group of people, so they prepare to fight, and the people transform into demons. Alexia recognizes one of them as the demon they were hunting, and they ask for the map, as a figure suddenly appears in the sky. It throws a spear with ridiculous force, killing the soldiers and knocking Alexia down. Zeus appears before Electra, and she asks him to fulfill his promise, telling him to take them away from there. But he says he can't, so she thinks she was a fool for trusting him and wonders how they can leave. He tries to console her, but she thinks his fear of Hera is greater than his love for her, so she leaves, and Zeus tries to follow her, but he sees Hera watching them. Meanwhile, the demons kill the guards, and their leader looks for Alexia, but he can't find her. He orders the others to find her, because they can't lose the map, so the demons decide to use a Cerberus. Zeus meets with Heron, saying he came to answer his questions, and Zeus reveals his true form, explaining that Electra wasn't lying to Heron. But he wonders how he could stand by while she suffered, so Zeus hopes Heron can forgive him, but Heron doesn't want to see him again. Zeus senses something, so he disappears, and Heron sees Alexia running from the demons as the Cerberus suddenly appears, and it starts chasing after them. Meanwhile in Olympus, the gods watch Ares fight against Apollo and Hermes. Hermes charges at Ares and attacks him with incredible speed, and Apollo aims for his head, but he manages to dodge it, and he knocks Apollo off his chariot. He jumps to attack Ares, but he blocks, and he manages to grab Hermes, throwing him at Apollo. But a lightning bolt suddenly strikes him, and Zeus appears furious, asking him what he told Hera, since he was the only one who knew where he was. But Hera appears, and explains that Ares said what she already knew. They start arguing, and Hera reminds him that she has always been loyal, but continues to be humiliated. She asks if he ever loved her, and he mentions that he does, but Hera asks him about Electra, and he falls silent, so she cries in anger as she unleashes her powers. She declares that she will kill Electra and her bastard son, but Zeus warns her not to do it. She thinks he can't stop her and reminds him that before they were married, she was the ruler of the gods, but Zeus tells her it's all in the past. Hera asks him if he knows what the others say when he's playing on Earth, and she reveals that they mock him. But she's the one who reminds them of the great hero he is, explaining that she's the one who keeps them in line. She remembers him as a hero during the war, but now he has no purpose, so he lives to drink and satisfy his desires. She claims that she's the one keeping him in power, thinking he's a disgrace. But he tells her not to touch Electra and demands an answer, but she turns her back, saying she doesn't respond to fools. He declares that there will be consequences, but Hera explains she won't tolerate his foolishness. Hermes appears, and she calls him a bastard as she leaves. He delivers a message to Zeus, telling him that Heron's city is under attack, so he decides to clear the clouds. Heron rushes to find his mother, but she isn't home, and the Cerberus continues to pursue them. Alexia fights against the creature, but she gets cornered, and Heron shoots arrows at it, so the Cerberus attacks him, knocking him down. Alexia attacks it from behind, and it collapses as Heron stabs its eye, pinning it to the ground, but the other head pushes him away. He asks Alexia about her soldiers, but she tells him they're all dead. The two see a horde of demons approaching, and Alexia thinks they can't lose the map. Hermes runs and clears the skies above the city, allowing Zeus to see what's happening. Electra notices people running to take shelter and wonders where Heron is. Heron and Alexia flee from the demons, and we see the enemy leader watching them. Heron tells Alexia about a mine that goes through the other mountain, thinking it's the best way to escape. He turns and shoots an arrow, which triggers his trap and causes the rocks to fall, killing several demons as the Cerberus removes its head to escape. The two are able to reach the city, and a guard asks Alexia what's happening, so she explains that they need to evacuate the city, and Heron suggests using the mine to escape. The man doesn't want to listen to a bastard, but she tells him to do it, and she continues on her way, but Heron decides to look for his mother, so they go their separate ways. Heron searches through the city, while the leader named Seraphim watches him, and he throws his bidon at him. Zeus sees this, and saves Heron by ordering him to stop, but the impact throws him away. He gets up, and notices Seraphim as he calls his weapon, which cuts Heron's shoulder, so Zeus becomes worried. Heron tries to use his bow, and Zeus tells him to run, but he doesn't listen, and he fires an arrow. Seraphim dodges it, and he counters, blowing Heron away. He flies towards Heron, who continues shooting his arrows, but Seraphim throws his bidon, so Heron dodges it. He calls his weapon again, but Zeus tells Heron what to do, allowing him to dodge it. Seraphim is intrigued, and Zeus asks Heron to flee again, so he starts running away. But Hera sees Zeus interfering as Seraphim continues to chase Heron. He gets closer and uses his weapon, but Heron jumps and falls onto some vases. He realizes they're filled with oil, so he decides to use it, while more demons approach him. He takes a torch and launches it at the oil, causing an explosion, which forces Seraphim to retreat. Heron rushes to the city's inner gates, but the merchant doesn't want to wait for him, so he cuts the rope, but Heron jumps, and he manages to get inside. He gets up and grabs a sword, before he starts searching for Elektra again. Elektra rushes to the mine with the others, but she falls and gets left behind. Seraphim flies towards the mine, and Alexia is hidden among the residents. She almost reaches the mine, but Seraphim uses his bident to block the entrance, and the people think this is the end, but Alexia runs towards the forest. Seraphim gets off his manticore as the residents become even more worried. Elektra also arrives, but realizes that the demons have trapped them, and she sees the city burning behind her. The Cerberus emerges from the city, and Heron is hiding in the forest, waiting for the demons to pass. Elektra sees the demons approaching, so she runs to a nearby house and hides there with a woman. Seraphim introduces himself as the leader of the demons and explains he's looking for Alexia. He wonders if there's a noble willing to speak for the city, so the merchant decides to step forward. He introduces himself to Seraphim, who realizes that he's a cousin of King Acrisius of Corinth. He wonders if Seraphim knows his cousin, so he reveals that Acrisius gave him the scar on his face. So he always remembers Acrisius when he sees a noble, and nothing gives him more satisfaction than seeing a noble die, so the merchant cries in despair. Seraphim explains he's doing the world a favor, because he makes people stronger by converting them. The demons arrive, and they reveal they picked up Alexia's scent, so Seraphim explains that he won't be needing the merchant's help, and he slices him in half. Meanwhile, Alexia tries to escape through the swamp and hides in a tree, but the demons get closer, so Zeus uses his power to help her, hiding her presence. Seraphim is confused that they lost the scent, but Hera decides to interfere, and she makes the wind blow Alexia's cloak. So they smell it, thinking the trail has returned, and Zeus becomes worried as the cloak gets closer to the house where Elektra is hiding. He prepares to deal with the matter, but is stopped by Hera and the other gods, and she explains that Elektra's life is in the hands of the Moirai. Elektra continues hiding, but the demons approach the house, and Seraphim finds her. The gods confront Zeus because he wants them to obey the laws, but he's willing to break it for Elektra. Zeus tries to defend himself, but Hera explains that the pantheon can't exist without law, and everyone must respect it, or there will be chaos. He chooses chaos, but is stopped by Poseidon, who thinks Hera is right, and Zeus asks him if he's choosing her side. But he explains he's just following the law, and explains that he doesn't want violence. Zeus wonders if he's threatening him, but Poseidon asks Zeus what he expects them to do, reminding him that breaking the law is punishable by death. Seraphim asks Elektra about Alexia, showing her the cloak, but she says she doesn't know. He points the bident at her, but her companion explains that she's telling the truth. But Seraphim kills her, saying he doesn't care, and we see Heron watching them from a distance, realizing that his mother is in danger. Seraphim threatens to kill Elektra, who sees Heron in the forest, so she starts praying for him. Seraphim thinks prayers won't help her, but she explains that she isn't praying for her, and Heron runs towards them. The demons try to stop him, but he defeats them and approaches Seraphim, who knocks him out in a single blow. Elektra runs to her son, but Seraphim hits her, so Heron gets up and starts attacking Seraphim. He's surprised, and Heron continues to advance at him, but Seraphim stops him, amused by how much hate he has. Seraphim strikes back, explaining that hate gives strength, and Elektra wakes up, seeing Heron on the floor. Seraphim tells him that he'll have nothing left, so he must convert or die, as he throws his weapon at Elektra, stabbing her in the back. Heron screams in agony as she draws her last breath, and Zeus is shocked by this, but Hera appears to be satisfied. Seraphim orders the demons to take Heron prisoner, while Hera thinks Zeus was wrong to believe in him, thinking he's weak because of Elektra's blood. Seraphim orders the demons to keep searching for Alexia, and he takes Elektra's necklace. After a while, Alexia comes out of the bushes, and she sees the bodies of the residents. Zeus is grieving while disguised as Elias, and he tells Alexia that Heron was taken captive, so she runs after him, and Zeus bids farewell to Elektra. Hermes appears, telling Zeus that her transition will be peaceful, and he takes her soul, storing it in his horn. He runs with incredible speed, and he reaches the underworld, where he releases Electra. Hermes blows a horn, and specters suddenly appear, as he explains that they're the dead who can't pay for their crossing. A boat approaches, scaring the specters away, and Hermes warns the guide to treat her well, or Zeus will make him pay. Hermes gives him 2 gold coins, and he asks Electra if there's anyone she would like to see before crossing over. She appears before Aaron, who regrets that he wasn't able to protect her. But she thinks that there are fates worse than death, telling him to remember who he is, and she disappears, as the Cerberus tries to bite him. He returns to his senses, but he wonders if he's dead, and a man thinks they're going to die, tossing him aside. Heron sees the men named Kofi and Evios, realizing they're all prisoners, and he asks them about Seraphim. So Evios says he doesn't know, but thinks Seraphim was chasing Alexia. Seraphim pursues Alexia to a river as he tries to attack her, but she falls into a waterfall. She finds a cave behind it, but Seraphim finds her and throws his bident, almost hitting her. He appears in front of her and admits he's impressed, but her wound begins to heal, and she takes his weapon, revealing herself as Hera. She forces him to kneel, and he asks her what she wants, so she explains that they aren't so different, because she also wants revenge. She tells him that killing nobles won't bring him peace, and finds it funny that he killed so many of them, without knowing he's the son of a king. He believes his father was killed in battle, but she explains that this isn't true, saying he wasn't raised by his real mother, and she decides to show him the truth. Seraphim learns that his father was murdered, and as a child, his uncle coveted the throne, so he tried to kill Seraphim, knowing he was the heir to the throne. With Seraphim out of the way, his uncle Acrisius knew he and his children would rule, but a loyal maid saves him and vows to protect him. She runs away with the child, hiding in a cave, where she prays for the gods' help, but a bear appears, and it's about to attack them. But Hera hears her prayers, so she pacifies the bear, and it allows Seraphim to drink its milk. He grows up well over the years, but one day, Acrisius' sons go after him. They interrogate the maid, but she claims to know nothing about him, so they call her a liar, revealing that her relatives told them everything. They start choking the woman, as they demand answers, and she sees Seraphim watching. He shoots an arrow, killing the man interrogating her, and the others try to search the bushes, but are suddenly attacked by bears. Seraphim kills another one, and he runs to help his mother, but she ends up dying, and her killer attacks him, leaving a scar on his eye. But a large bear suddenly arrives, slaughtering the soldiers, so his mother's killer escapes. After the incident, he goes to the shores of Melodone, waiting for his revenge. He heads to the town, where he follows his mother's killer, and attacks him from behind. He recognizes Seraphim, who mercilessly stabs him to death. Seraphim takes the man's sword, and he remembers how the man used it to ruin his life, so he uses it to deliver the finishing blow. But the guards see him, so they start chasing him through the city. He manages to reach the gate, but is injured by the guards, so he runs away, as the guards continue to pursue him. He reaches a cliff, where he takes a leap of faith, but he's carried away by the current. The guards realize he's still alive, so they continue the search. Seraphim reaches a cave, where he encounters the giant's body, and sees the bident. He hears the guards approaching, so he jumps on the giant to grab the weapon, but the giant starts talking to him, telling him to eat its flesh. He obeys the instructions, as the guards approach him, but Seraphim transforms into a demon. He picks up the bident, and he uses it to fight them, but they knock him down, and they start beating him up, but he tries to grab the bident, and it responds to him, pinning a guard to the wall. So he realizes that he can control the weapon, and he uses it to slaughter the guards. After witnessing the carnage, 3 of the guards begged for their lives, swearing loyalty to him. Hera stops the vision, and tells him he has been hunting Acrisius and his sons ever since, but his heart remains filled with hatred. She reveals that it will continue this way even after he achieves his goal, saying he should blame Zeus for everything that happened to him. He wonders what she's talking about, so she explains that Zeus wanted his mother for himself. She shows Seraphim a vision of the day he was born, and how he ended up in his uncle's hands. Acrisius realizes that his brother has been killed, and he orders the maid not to tell anyone about this, as he takes the child from her arms. She stops the vision, and she tells him he should have been a king, but all he knew was pain. She wonders if he can imagine the horrors that await him in the underworld, but promises she can help him with that. He asks her what Zeus did to make her turn against him, but she explains that it's none of his business, asking him if he wants her help. Seraphim hesitates, so she asks him if he wants to know what happened to his real mother. He becomes curious, so she tells him his mother was murdered, saying he was the one who killed her. So he becomes shocked, and opens the necklace he took from Electra, realizing she's his mother, but Hera explains that if he truly wants revenge, he should go after Zeus. Hera is taken prisoner, and he asks the others where the demons are taking them, but the demons stop them from talking. He discovers that the demons are taking them to a boat, and the others mention that no one escapes from the galleys. Alexia decides to visit Chiron, and we see Hera watching her. She enters a centaur village and finds Chiron in his office. He asks her why she visited him, so she takes the map, telling him she needs his help, because there are writings on the map, but she can't translate it. So he reads it, and he explains that it's a map to the demon's labyrinth, where they keep the giant's body. Alexia wonders where the reference points are, so Chiron explains that it's linked to the constellation Cassiopeia. He shows her the constellation, and they see the map fitting with the stars, so she thanks him for his help, but he explains that her enemies also know about him, and she becomes surrounded by demons, as Seraphim reveals himself. Chiron tells her he had no choice but to betray her, because they arrived first, and they threatened to kill his people. She tries to resist, and he thinks about copying the map, but he sees Seraphim ready to attack her, so he drops the map and saves her. But he steps in the mud, and walks over the map, advising Alexia not to resist as he restrains her. He gives the map to Seraphim, who decides to take Alexia with him, but Chiron tells him that this wasn't the deal. But he threatens to kill the centaurs if Chiron protects her, so he hands her over. In the galley, Heron works with the other slaves, and he wonders how he can escape. He discovers that Kofi was the fighting champion 3 times in a row, and Evios made a lot of money betting on him. Heron realizes that the demons are distracted, so he tells Kofi that it's time for him to prove his strength again. The demons chain Alexia, and Seraphim thinks she'll understand him after experiencing the power of a giant. She refuses to convert into a demon, but Seraphim hopes she would reconsider, saying it would be a shame to kill her. He sees Hera entering his tent, and he goes to meet her, but he sees an injured demon, thinking he's too weak to be a part of his army, so Seraphim kills him. He enters his tent, and Hera forces him to kneel. He asks her what she wants, so she explains that she needs him to return the favor because she helped him find Alexia. She needs him to retrieve a sword for her and kill the man meant to wield it. He asks her about the details, so she explains that it was made for one of his prisoners, and it was forged by Zeus, so it has the power to cut through anything, saying he can use it to destroy Talos. Seraphim orders the demons to take Alexia to the coast, and he flies to Electra's house. He knows that the sword was made for Heron, and he sees the city he burned, but something catches his attention as he sees the sword on rock. So he takes it, and he uses it to slice through the rocks, realizing that it can cut through anything, so he knows it's the sword he's looking for. Heron is still in the galley, and he plans to act when the guards change the oil. Evios starts fighting with Kofi to distract the guard, but he whips them, ordering them to return to their seats, but we see that Evios was able to steal the keys. He uses it to free himself from the handcuffs, and throws it to Kofi. The guard passes by, so Evios attacks him, while the others get rid of their handcuffs. Kofi immobilizes him, and Heron takes his sword, using it to deliver the finishing blow. The guards go after them, and Heron fights them as a demon runs to the bell to alert the others, but he's caught by the whip, and he gets knocked down as Heron finishes him off. He gives the keys to the other prisoners, telling them to free themselves, and he uses oil to attack the demons. More of them rush to attack him, but he fights along with Kofi and Evios. A demon gets on top of Heron, but Evios helps him, and he stabs the demon, throwing him into the sea. A demon manages to sound the alarm, but he ends up dying as the other prisoners arrive. We see Alexia on the shore, while Evios and Kofi take over the ship, causing it to crash into the other one. Meanwhile, Hermes tells Zeus that he saw Hera with Seraphim. Zeus wonders what he's saying, so he explains that he went there to take a demon's soul and saw her in Seraphim's tent. So he thinks she's conspiring with the demons to sway the war in their favor. Seraphim flies towards Heron, cutting the mast with his sword, and Zeus recognizes the sword he's using. Zeus knows that Heron isn't ready to fight Seraphim, Thinking the will of the fates want him to save Heron, so he throws a lightning bolt, destroying the ship in an instant. Seraphim recovers, preparing to attack Heron again, but Zeus continues to throw lightning, creating giant waves as it strikes the sea, and Alexia sees her opening, so she uses the chance to free herself. The gods are shocked by Zeus's behavior, as they all see him interfering, so they stare at him, and he realizes he's in trouble, but Hera appears to be pleased. Heron and the others arrive at the beach, where he's surprised to see Alexia. Evios wonders what just happened, and Zeus appears as Elias, explaining that the gods have joined the war. Seraphim takes the bite and he sees Hera watching him, so he attacks her, but she transforms and sends him flying. He ends up in a temple, and Hera questions how he dared to attack a goddess. But Seraphim wonders why she sent him to kill a man protected by Zeus, and tells her to find someone else to do her bidding. But she says she will stick to her plan, promising to reveal Acrisius's location if he helps her. Seraphim asks where he is, but Hera explains that he needs to find the cauldron of darkness first. She thinks she's being watched, but she knows he can move freely, so she needs him to help her. We return to Heron, as he wonders why Zeus is there, saying they don't need his help, but he explains that Heron is the key to the war, so he wants to look after him. Evios thinks this is too much for him, and he's about to leave, but Zeus stops him, and explains that he must accompany Alexia to regain his honor. He doesn't know what Zeus is talking about, but he makes it clear that he knows about the deal he made. Evios and Kofi are surprised, wondering how he knows their names, so he explains that he knows everything about them, saying he knows that they're smugglers. Alexia wonders where they need to go, so Zeus explains that the demon's source of power is in Melodoni, inside the labyrinth, and they must destroy the giant to defeat the demons. Alexia explains that the labyrinth map was lost, but Zeus assures her that it will find her. A group of Theban soldiers wish to redeem themselves, because they lost their honor when they were captured, so they decide to help. Kofi thinks they should also take this chance to redeem themselves, but Evios says that he will haunt Kofi if he dies. Zeus asks Heron to make his decision, so he thinks about it and asks if Zeus can help him kill Seraphim. So Zeus reveals that he can do more than that, and he calls a griffin to him, before flying away as an eagle. Heron rides the griffin, and it flies away, as it follows Zeus to Olympus. Heron arrives with Zeus, so the other gods are shocked, and they start gossiping about Heron, but Zeus's sons greet him. Hera arrives, and wonders how he dares bring his bastard to Olympus, but Zeus confronts her for conspiring against him. She thinks he's provoking her, but he explains he doesn't want war against her, and admits that everything happening on Earth is his fault. So he promises never to betray her again, and asks for forgiveness, but Hera tells him to give her Heron's head. Zeus can't fulfill her demands, so she realizes that he's choosing Heron over her, and she leaves Olympus with some of the other gods. Zeus warns Poseidon that he shouldn't trust Hera, but he thinks Zeus is foolish for angering her. He takes Heron to train, and wonders what he's capable of, while Hephaestus has one of his automatons fight against Heron. It advances on Heron, who tries to attack, but it's stronger than him, and it sends him flying. He throws his sword at it, but it doesn't work, and the automaton kicks him away. He tries to use his shield, but the automaton throws it back and knocks him down, so Zeus thinks this is a disaster. He explains that Heron is relying on anger, but not all enemies can be defeated with strength alone, and asks Heron to think more while fighting. So he takes his shield and tries again, but he's still no match for the automaton, as he continues to fight with anger. He becomes frustrated, so Zeus stops the training and scolds him for thinking his anger is the way. Zeus destroys the automaton to show Heron true strength, but he walks away, and Zeus thinks he might have been mistaken. But Hephaestus thinks he isn't teaching him correctly, questioning Zeus's methods. Zeus reminds Hephaestus that they're short on time, but he explains that Heron needs his father. Alexia and the others continue their way to Melodoni's, and she wonders what Zeus was talking about. But they say it's a long story, explaining that they sold something to the wrong people. Alexia continues walking, and Kofi hopes this will be their chance to redeem themselves. Zeus checks on Heron, and he admits that he's trying to be a good father, but he doesn't know what to do, because he didn't have a good relationship with his own father, who wanted to kill him, and he tells Heron to get some rest. Heron's training continues the next morning, but he keeps failing, so Zeus stops his training again, telling him to overcome his anger. but Heron asks about his mother and wonders how Zeus could let her die. So he reveals that even he is powerless at times, and Heron wonders why he doesn't kill Seraphim. But he explains that Electra doesn't want him to die, revealing that he's Heron's half-brother, and he's shocked to hear this. We see Alexia walking in the woods, but Chiron is watching her, so she confronts him, asking him what he wants, so he explains that he wants to deliver something to her. She opens it, and discovers that Chiron made a copy of the map, while Kofi realizes that the map found her as Zeus said it would, and asks what they need to do. Chiron explains that the giant is the source of the demon's power, so they must destroy it for the demons to die. Evios thinks it's impossible to go to Melodoni because it's heavily guarded, but Chiron explains that it's possible if they go from behind, and explains that they must go through the underworld. Evios thinks it's suicide, but Alexia asks Chiron to show her the way. In Olympus, Heron is still frustrated, but he decides to keep calm and sees how he can defeat the automaton. So he stabs his sword into its armor and pushes it with his shield, allowing him to destroy its gears. Zeus praises him, and Hermes arrives to bring news, explaining that Hera and the other gods went to the underworld. Zeus wonders if Hades is on her side, so Hermes explains that he's neutral, but promised refuge to any god seeking shelter. A spider walks on Heron's arm, but Zeus stops him from killing it, explaining that it's a call from the Moirai, the women who control the thread of destiny. So he goes to them, and Zeus explains that he must enter alone, so he follows Zeus's instructions, and he sees the threads of destiny woven by the Moirai. He asks them if they wanted to see him, and they tell him they want to help, as they sense he's in doubt. He explains that he doesn't believe in destiny, thinking man has free will, but they tell him that destiny and free will coexist. They explain it's like a baby that keeps walking near an edge, saying they can see what will happen based on the choices the baby makes, but they aren't taking away his free will. They show Heron his thread, and when he touches it, he sees visions of his life. He keeps looking and sees his journey up to that moment. They tell him he's about to make a choice that will affect everyone, so the fate of the world is in his hands. They explain that his fate is split into two futures, and when he touches it, he sees Alexia and the others in the underworld. So he realizes they're in danger and wonders if they're going to die, but the Moirai explain that fates are fluid and decide not to give him an answer. He runs out, explaining that his friends need his help, but Zeus tries to stop him, thinking he isn't ready. We see Zeus bathing, but Seraphim is watching him. He feels something, but Seraphim pins his hand and jumps at his throat, cutting his head off. Hera shows up and congratulates him, telling him that the world will be his, but they look at Zeus's body, and Seraphim becomes confused, realizing it was all an illusion. Zeus expels an Oniroi, and he explains it was Phantasos, who is responsible for deceptive dreams, and warns Seraphim that Hera is manipulating him. He attacks Zeus, but he controls the bident and puts it aside, explaining that what Hera told him was only half the story. He admits he underestimated Acrisius's greed, but he always tried to protect Seraphim to make up for his mistake. He shows that Hera was responsible for sending the bear, but he was the one who fed him when he was hungry. He was also watching when Acrisius's sons tried to kill Seraphim, and it was he who saved Seraphim as a bear. He explains that his mother's death wasn't his fault, and Hera manipulated him so he would find her, as she loved the idea of Electra being killed by her own son. Seraphim wonders why he should trust Zeus, so he explains that he asks nothing in return, unlike Hera, and throws a coin with a mountain on it, saying Seraphim will find his revenge there. He becomes furious, remembering everything he went through because of Acrisius, so he flies to look for the mountain. Alexia's group reaches the land of the dead with Chiron, and he explains that this was where the gods fought against the giants, saying the marks of the battle can still be seen. He explains there's no turning back once they enter the mist, and warns everyone not to disturb the cursed ground by running, but most importantly, they can't look back. Chiron prepares to leave, but Alexia tells him to go home because the centaurs need him, saying his knowledge will be lost if he dies. He finds her stubborn and watches as they move forward, wishing them luck. Kofi spots demons ahead of them, but Evios explains they're just illusions, so they keep moving forward. Everyone sees illusions, and a soldier becomes scared, so he looks back, but he's turned into stone. The others are able to resist and continue crossing, but Alexia suddenly sees her mother, so she becomes emotional. But she knows it's not real, so she continues to move forward, but she also sees her father, who blames her for her mother's death. She knows he's just an illusion, so she kills him and moves along. The rest of the group manages to cross, and Kofi is happy that Alexia didn't look back, but she confesses that she almost did. They reach the labyrinth, but they see a minotaur guarding the passage. They wonder if this one is real, but an arrow pierces its head as Heron arrives to join them. Alexia is surprised to see him while he explains he's returning the favor, and he sees her with the map, so he decides to end this quickly. Meanwhile, Seraphim finds the mountain, and there's a cave at its base. He enters it, and he finds Acrisius inside, but he knew this day would come. He explains that he just took the opportunity, and thinks Seraphim would have done the same, but he explains he would never kill a child, so Acrisius calls him weak. Acrisius wonders if he won't do anything, so Seraphim cuts his fingers off as he thinks of everyone Acrisius killed. Seraphim proceeds to torture him as he explains that people suffered because of Acrisius, and he pummels Acrisius until there's nothing left of his body. Alexia's group continues their journey through the labyrinth, and she uses the map to find the way. They go deeper and reach the location of the giant's body, but it's nowhere to be found, so they realize that something is wrong, and Seraphim appears with his army of demons. But he explains that he's tired of being manipulated, wondering why they should obey the gods, because they're more flawed than humans. He mentions that the gods ruin their lives, blaming them for Electra's death, so Seraphim asks Heron to join him and help him avenge their mother by defeating the gods. Heron thinks he just wants to rule the world, but Seraphim explains that this is the only way to prevent more tragedies from happening. But Heron disagrees, saying Zeus can turn Seraphim back into a human. He asks Heron to choose a side, but he chooses to fight the demons, so Seraphim charges in, but Heron shoots his hand, causing him to drop his sword. The demons begin to attack, and the others use fire against them. The group decides to retreat, but Seraphim pursues them with the bident and kills several soldiers. He drives his weapon into the wall, causing the cave to collapse, and the ceiling falls on him. The four head to the exit, and Heron calls his griffin, telling everyone to ride it. They follow his instructions, but Evios falls because there's not enough space for him, so they carry him by the claw. Hera appears and asks Seraphim what he's doing, ordering him to obey her. Heron goes to Olympus as Seraphim starts pursuing him, and Hera exits the cave, but we see footsteps behind her. So she smiles, using her power to reveal Hermes, and Ares attacks him, knocking him down. Hera takes his bracelet, and she leaves as Ares continues to beat him. Apollo appears, throwing fireballs at Ares, and Hermes uses this chance to escape. Ares throws his hammer at Apollo, causing him to fall, and Ares delivers the finishing blow, before throwing Apollo into the ocean. Meanwhile, Seraphim seems to be looking for something, and he dives into the ocean, swimming towards a crevice. He dives deeper until he reaches a cave, where he finds the cauldron of darkness. He sees the automaton Talos, and after he takes the cauldron, Talos starts moving, trying to protect it. Seraphim attacks with the bident, but Talos easily deflects it. Talos attacks him, blowing him away, and he struggles to keep up with its overwhelming strength. But he uses the bident to fly to Talos, using the sword to cut its armor. Talos tries to stomp on him, but he cuts its heel, causing it to fall to its knees, and he throws the sword into its eye. Seraphim escapes with the cauldron, and he reaches the surface, but Hera takes it, and uses Hermes' bracelet to open it, releasing the souls of the giants. They wake up from the bottom of the ocean, and Zeus thinks she's gone mad, while Hermes appears, saying he has a message from Hera. Zeus wonders what it is, but Hermes suddenly stabs his neck, and the real Hermes appears to save him. We learn that Hera was the one who stabbed him, and she flies away, as Zeus collapses, covered in his own blood, and the giants begin to emerge from the ocean. We see them walking out of the water, while Hera and her allies watch them. She decides to talk to the giants, asking them to listen to her, but a giant charges at her, so the gods prepare to fight, but Hera uses the cauldron and takes his soul. The giants seem worried, and Hera captures another giant's soul before he can attack. So they decide to listen to her, and Hera is pleased that they're cooperating, so she returns their souls. She asks them to help her kill Zeus, promising to give them the ocean as a reward, but Poseidon overhears her, and he appears to be upset. Meanwhile, Zeus is on the verge of death, but he uses his powers to stop the bleeding. Poseidon suddenly appears, and we see that he was able to save Apollo. Zeus asks him what he wants, so he explains that Hera went too far, saying he wants to join Zeus. He realizes that she offered the ocean to the giants, asking Poseidon about the cauldron, so he explains that there are wagons behind the giants, so he thinks the cauldron could be there. Zeus realizes they need to attack, and suggests distracting Hera while someone retrieves the cauldron. Hermes offers to do it, but Hera thinks Hera will be expecting that, since he's the fastest god, so Hera suggests going in his place. Zeus agrees, knowing she would never expect that, but Hermes thinks it's madness to leave the course of the war in the hands of a mortal, so Zeus reminds Hermes that Hera is his son. Hephaestus raises the castle's defenses, and the gods prepare for war. Hera's friends also take weapons for themselves, and Apollo gives Hera a gift from Hephaestus. Olympus begins to tremble as the giants arrive with an army of demons, so the gods prepare for war. Evios confesses that he sold parts of a giant to the demons that Alexia was chasing, but Hera says they're lucky because they have a chance to redeem themselves. The demons continue marching, so Zeus tells the gods to stand firm and reminds them that no one has ever conquered Olympus, saying they will never be defeated. The war begins, and Hermes creates a tornado, throwing countless demons away. The giants also attack, and we see Ares fighting as Zeus throws his lightning on the battlefield. He thinks it's time, so Hera prepares to leave, while Zeus asks him to show the world who he is. Hera and his friends use the catapults to hide inside the fireballs, and they're able to pass unnoticed. So Hera uses his arrow to signal Hephaestus, who redirects the catapults at the giants. Zeus enters the battlefield, overwhelming the demons, but he sees a giant reaching Olympus, breaking its walls, so he tells Hera to hurry. Another giant flies over them, pulling several Olympians towards him, and the water of Olympus floods the battlefield, sweeping away everything, so Apollo rescues his soldiers. Poseidon uses his powers to control the water and attack the giants as Zeus dives into the water, unleashing his powers and electrocuting everyone on the battlefield. Zeus thinks it's finally over, but one of the giants hits Poseidon, while Zeus is attacked by Hera. Hera's group eliminates the demons guarding the wagons, but they realize that the cauldron isn't there. Hera sees his arrow hit two ravens, and hears the sound of birds, so he gets an idea of where the cauldron might be. He calls his griffin and flies towards the noise, discovering a flock of crows protecting the cauldron, so he uses his arrows to clear the path, but the crows start attacking him. Zeus emerges from the rubble, warning Hera that the giants will betray her, and he tells her not to let them destroy Olympus, but she says he should have thought of that before he betrayed her. She launches countless stones at him as she cries in anger, but a lightning bolt strikes her, and she crashes to the ground. The cauldron begins to fall, and Hera dives to reach it, but Seraphim also tries to take it, and the giants notice them. Hera is able to grab it, but Seraphim collides with him, killing his griffin, and Seraphim grabs him, telling him he chose the wrong side. Hera recovers, and Zeus asks her to stop before it's too late, but she blames him for everything. She's suddenly betrayed and attacked by the snake giant, which tries to tear her apart, so Zeus saves her, attacking the giant with a powerful lightning bolt. But the giant endures it, and Zeus ends up getting caught as the giant regenerates. It prepares to kill Hera, but Zeus winks at her, and she recalls how he saved her in the past. So she becomes emotional, and he decides to sacrifice his life to save her, causing an enormous explosion, which grabs everyone's attention. Hera witnesses his death, as Seraphim tells him that he should have joined the demons before letting him fall. Hera tries to reach Zeus's helmet, but her arm is cut off by the bident, and Seraphim prepares to kill her, but she uses her ravens to disappear, leaving behind Hermes' bracelet. Seraphim gets the cauldron, and Ares can't believe what he's seeing. He's attacked by a giant, but Hermes helps him, and Apollo continues fighting, but is caught by the flying giant. Poseidon uses his water to attack them, but the giants appear to be winning the battle. Seraphim thinks he has won, but Kofi suddenly attacks him, so he drops the cauldron, and Hera catches it. Seraphim is able to overpower Kofi, and he's about to fall to his death, but Evios saves him, and Alexia kills the manticore, so Seraphim crashes to the ground. He attacks Alexia, who struggles to defend herself, and he's about to finish her off, but Hera protects her. Seraphim throws his bident, but Hera grabs it and knocks him down. Heron continues to beat him as he thinks about Zeus, but Seraphim uses his claws and throws him against the wall. He charges in, but Seraphim overpowers him and tries to stab him using the bident, so he grabs onto it with all his strength. At that moment, he thinks of Zeus's sacrifice and how he was trained to remain calm. So he allows himself to be pierced, and he thinks about his journey, thinking his life is about to come to an end. But he pulls the bident into his body, stabbing Seraphim through the chest. He pulls it out, and Seraphim realizes that Heron is exhausted. But Heron is suddenly awakened, and he summons a lightning bolt that kills Seraphim in an instant. But Heron sees the giant who attacked Zeus, so he rushes to the cauldron, and he reaches it just in time, allowing him to imprison the souls of the giants. The battle comes to an end, and the next day, he wakes up on a bed with his wounds treated. He sees the statue of his father, and his siblings appear, saying they're proud of him, and Apollo hands him Electra's necklace. He realizes that Olympus is at peace, and he's happy to see his friends are okay. On the other hand, we see Seraphim waking up, and he tries to call the bident, but it returns to Hades' hand, so he realizes he's in the underworld. Hades reveals that he's the owner of the bident, and he tells Seraphim that his punishment is worse than he could ever imagine. But Hades offers to help him if he kneels before him. We cut back to during the battle on Olympus, as Hades watches from the underworld, planning his revenge on Hera and Zeus for their betrayal, and he thinks about stealing the Alcinian stone from Zeus's temple. He looks at his wife Persephone, and explains that if they do this, they can finally be together during the spring. So Hades orders his shadows to take the stone, and we see them rushing to Olympus. Upon reaching the battlefield, they send their owl to scout the area, as they move behind enemy lines. Hermes creates tornadoes against the demons, as the shadows sneak past him. The battle continues, and the shadows manage to infiltrate Olympus, but they encounter automatons along the way, so they use the owl to distract one of them before attacking. The other automatons march to attack them, so two of the shadows stay to fight, as one advances towards the temple. The shadows deal with the automatons, and they see Zeus casting his lightning on the battlefield. He sends Heron off, and Alexia goes with him. The group gathers, and Heron thinks they don't need to do this, but Alexia thinks they do, saying she always knew he was touched by the gods, so it's an honor to fight by his side. They enter the battlefield, as Zeus calls his sister Hestia, along with his daughter Asoa. He gives his ring, and asks her to go to his temple to protect the Alcinian stone, because it must not fall into Hera's hands. Hestia thinks it might be risky to move it, but he trusts her, and asks her to take the stone to Gaia, so Hestia accepts the task, and Zeus asks Asoa to help her. Hades' shadow reaches Zeus's temple, where he sees several statues in the hall. He suddenly steps on a trap, and the statues come to life. They attack him, but he teleports to avoid their blows, and he notices that they stop attacking after he crosses a line. He goes to the gate where the stone is kept, but a goddess named Hecate appears, and questions who's trying to approach the Alcinian stone. Hestia arrives, and she enters the temple, so the shadow hides, preparing to kill her, but the owl sees Asoa arriving, so he hides from her. Hecate asks who she is, and Hestia introduces herself, saying she was sent by Zeus, so she's allowed to enter. Hestia sees the stone, but is overwhelmed by a strange power when she touches it, so she uses her cloak to take it. She meets Asoa, and the two run together as the shadows pursue them. They decide to attack, launching arrows at them, so Asoa protects Hestia, who summons fire to fight back. The flying titan is attacking, so they run for cover and manage to escape the shadows. They realize someone is after the stone, and they need to keep moving, but the owl finds them as the shadows come up with an idea. They go to the Kires, the creatures that devour the dead, and they decide to use them, ordering them to attack Hestia and Asoa, so they start flying away. Meanwhile, Poseidon attacks the Titans, as Asoa and Hestia clear their path from the demons. The Kires suddenly attack them, so Hestia starts flying, and uses her fire to knock them down. The shadows wait for their opportunity, and one of the Kires manages to grab the stone, as another one attacks Hestia. She suddenly sees Zeus sacrificing himself for Hera, causing a massive shockwave. But this seems to influence the Alcinian stone, causing Hestia to lose control, and she manages to get rid of the Kires. She flies away with the stone, as Asoa mourns Zeus's death. Hestia retreats from the battle and cries for her brother Zeus, but realizes she's being followed by the owl, so she burns it. The shadows are chasing her, but the owl's death affects their leader, causing his eyes to bleed. The others try to help him, but Hades suddenly appears, scolding them for not being discreet, and he uses his power to strangle their leader. He asks about Hestia, and the shadow reveals she's heading to Crete, so Hades drops him and leaves. We go to Heron after he defeated Seraphim and sealed away the giants. Asoa lifts the giant's hand off of him, as Hermes arrives to retrieve him. They realize that he was able to imprison the Titans and awaken his powers, but they know he needs to get treatment at Olympus, so Hermes takes him there. Asoa grabs the cauldron and remembers how the lightning responded to Heron as Artemis appears, and Asoa wonders if he could be the chosen one. We see Heron being taken to Olympus as he starts dreaming of a woman who explains that a war is coming, so he needs to recover the sword Zeus gave him and save his brother. But the weakness overcomes him and he ends up fainting. Hestia keeps flying and she finally reaches the island of Crete, where she mourns Zeus's death. A statue suddenly appears and it transforms into Gaia, the mother of the Titans and giants and the grandmother of Zeus. Hestia gives her the Alcinian stone, and Gaia mentions that the stone's power always corrupts the best. She touches the stone, and it starts to glow, as she mentions that she will prepare Zeus's son for what's to come. Hades returns to the underworld, and Persephone asks how it went, so he explains that Hestia took the stone to Gaia, thinking she must have taken it to the hidden realm. Persephone reassures him they will find it, saying they can finally avenge the injustices they suffered and claim the throne. She hurries to fix the vase and realizes that Gaia is connected to all the giants, so she has an idea and asks Hades if Seraphim can go to the hidden realm since he's part giant. Hades is shocked, so he goes to Seraphim's body and places 2 coins on his eyes so that he can cross the underworld. We see a giant figure as Gaia tells Heron to find the sword in the bronze giant to save his brother. He wakes up from his dream and he sees his friends sleeping peacefully. But he seems confused, and he heads to the balcony as Alexia wonders what he's doing. He decides to go to the battlefield, where he remembers what Seraphim said and how he fought with him. Heron becomes frustrated and thinks about his powers as lightning strikes him again. Alexia arrives to calm him down, and she believes Seraphim got what he deserved. The Moirai spider suddenly appears, so they realize that the fates are calling. But Heron kills it, saying Seraphim was right, because the gods are more flawed than humans. We see Seraphim in the underworld, and Hades appears, offering to free him from the underworld's pain if he kneels. He screams in rage and asks what Hades wants, so he reveals he wants justice and asks if Seraphim doesn't want to be free. Seraphim doesn't want to believe him, but Hades mentions that the gods also ruined his life, and explains that Seraphim only has 2 options, to help him or face eternal judgment. But Seraphim chooses judgment, so he crosses the lake and reaches a place where he gets a body. The shadows chain him and take him to the palace, where he goes to the court, where he sees 3 men looking down. He realizes they're the kings who judge the dead, and Hades is also watching above him. King Rhadamanthus tells him that he sent more people to Hades than anyone, so now he will receive his punishment. He shows all the massacres he committed, explaining that he killed both guilty and innocent people. 3 coins are placed on the scale, and the king mentions Electra, knowing Seraphim didn't know who she was, but he knew that same suffering and anguish since childhood. But instead of having compassion, he decided to recreate all the horrors he suffered, killing his own mother, but he also acknowledges that Hera was using him, so a smaller coin is put on the scale. But Rhadamanthus starts talking about his good deeds, so he thinks about a woman. Rhadamanthus thinks that maybe he felt the only true love for her, and admits that sometimes a single good act can outweigh years of bad deeds, so he adds a coin to the other side of the scale. He asks Seraphim if he regrets what he did, so he thinks about it, but admits he doesn't. Rhadamanthus explains that everyone can make mistakes, but he must yield if he's on the wrong path, and advises him not to be so proud. Seraphim refuses again, so Hades becomes angry and calls him a fool, ordering him to repent. But Seraphim declares he wants nothing from them, so Rhadamanthus sentences him to spend eternity in Tartarus to learn to let go of his pride. The shadows grab him, but Seraphim starts speaking, thinking they have no right to judge him. He's about to be punished, but Hades stops it and allows him to speak. He mentions how they were all born kings, saying they only got their positions because they're the bastard children of Zeus. He asks King Minos how many people he sacrificed to the Minotaur, and wonders if Rhadamanthus freed his people. He also talks about King Aeacus, thinking people would live better lives as insects than as his subjects. He confesses that he killed many people, but only because no one was free or safe, and it was impossible to be righteous in their kingdoms. Rhadamanthus is done talking and orders him to be whipped, so Seraphim grabs the whip and gets rid of the guards. But they call a gladiator, who knocks him down, coming after him while Hades gets frustrated. We see a mechanism to bring sunlight to the underworld, and Persephone uses it to cultivate her plants. Hades talks to her, and he's sad that they must keep separating. She asks if he managed to convince Seraphim, but he explains that Seraphim doesn't trust the gods. She can't blame him, and suggests they use kindness instead of force, and thinks he needs a father figure. The bell starts ringing, so they realize winter is over, and it's time for her to return to the surface. Hades thinks he failed her, but she assures him that nothing can separate souls that are destined to be together, and she uses her powers to create a tree for him to remember her while she's away. She's ready to go, and Hades tries to console their daughter Melanoe. She's angry and thinks he should make her stay, but Persephone calms her and asks for patience, as they promise it would be the last time she's away. She leaves in her chariot and sees her children crying, but this makes Hades furious, so he grabs his bident. He goes to Tartarus, and we see all the gods and titans suffering as Seraphim serves his punishment. Hades appears, scaring away the snake, and he offers Seraphim water, but he refuses it, thinking Hades wants to use him. Hades explains that he's different from the others, and says he always wanted him to survive, revealing that he was the one who sent Seraphim to eat the giant's flesh. Seraphim is in shock, and Hades explains that he wanted to help him resist, and that's why he also let Seraphim connect to his bident. Seraphim thinks it would be better if he had died, but Hades thinks his destiny can change, saying he just has to trust him. Hades explains that he was also betrayed by the gods, and shows Seraphim a vision of his past. After the last titan fell, his blood spread in the sea, and the giants were born, but an even greater evil appeared. The gods fought the giants, as the monster waited in the deep, and continued to grow in power. The war ended, but the monster continued to grow, and one day, it finally revealed itself. It was named Typhon, causing destruction throughout Olympus, and the battle against it was harder than any other, but the gods managed to imprison the beast, and trap it under Mount Etna. They couldn't kill it, so they used the sorcery of Hecate to trap it, and she explains that it will be imprisoned, but they can't mention its name, or it will awaken from her spell. The power Hecate removed from the monster is placed in a diamond, creating the Alcinian stone. Zeus thinks the power is too strong, and no one could control the entire world, so he decides to divide the three worlds, and the ruler of the skies will keep the Alcinian stone. But Hades explains that in the end, greed was too strong, so Hera and Zeus plotted to rule the skies and keep the stone. He mentions that Zeus's greed changed his destiny forever, just as Seraphim's uncle Acrisius ruined his life. Hades thinks it's unfair, because destiny should have decided their realm, and he ended up becoming the ruler of the underworld. Seraphim doesn't understand what he means, so he talks about Gaia, and the realm she took the Alcinian stone to. He explains that Seraphim can enter that realm, because he has giant blood in his veins. But Seraphim prefers to spend eternity in Tartarus, because he doesn't want to be used by the gods again. Hera goes to speak with Hephaestus, who talks about the lightning he summoned, thinking it won't be easy to control such power. Hephaestus wonders why he came, and Hera asks how to find the sword that Zeus made, as it's the only thing left of him. Hephaestus believes this isn't his only motive, but he gives him a compass, and explains that he needs to place the mineral he used to make the sword in it, saying it will guide him. But Hephaestus tells him to be careful, as the sword is likely with Talos. We see a group of people approaching Olympus, and they prostrate as a sign of respect to Zeus. Apollo acknowledges that Zeus had flaws, but no one dared to challenge him, and Hera wonders if he's truly dead. So Hephaestus explains that they don't die like mortals, but he will go to the underworld to be judged. Apollo explains that Zeus can disappear in the underworld if he's forgotten, so they must continue to remember him, and Apollo plans to build temples for him. Hephaestus thinks they should also protect his legacy, and notices that all the gods of Olympus come to honor Zeus. Apollo agrees, since they must keep the alliances, but he suddenly wonders where Hades is. Seraphim is awakened by Hades, who takes him to see the underworld. Hades shows him the river Lethe and explains that it can erase his memory, so he always thinks about drinking its waters to forget his suffering. But he never drinks it, as his wife and children depend on him, knowing they would remain trapped in the underworld if he forgets about them. He dreams of one day being able to leave the underworld, and he decides to give Seraphim a gift, telling him to wish for happiness, as the river will show him his happiest memory. Seraphim sees the woman in the water, so he starts crying, as Hades explains that he knows his pain and remembers how he never wanted to be stuck in the underworld. It's a rich place with many realms, but he explains that living there has poisoned him. He reveals that he once felt overwhelmed, so he became furious and fled to see the sky and the sea again. He thinks his realm is like a prison, and the time he can spend away from the underworld is limited, as he starts to feel pain if he stays away for too long. But one day, he sees Persephone and can't help falling in love with her. He begins to watch her kindness every day, even though he suffers for being away from the underworld. But he explains that her mother Demeter would never accept him because a goddess like Persephone can't live in the underworld. But he continues to watch her as she cries for her horse, but something catches her attention. She notices a bottle, and he explains that it will help the animal, but disappears before she can see him. She realizes it's a healing potion, so she uses it on the horse, and it instantly recovers, so she thanks her benefactor, but wonders why he never appears. Hades mentions that he knows what it's like to love someone he can't have, just like Seraphim. We see Seraphim injured in the forest when someone approaches him, so he wakes up and almost kills her, but he collapses because of his wound, so she takes care of him. Hades explains that he understands how Seraphim feels, and we see him visiting her in secret, and they quickly fall in love. We see Hades talking with Persephone, as he mentions that gardening taught her to see the world differently, since she needs to pay attention to details for the garden to survive. He thinks this is why she appreciates the smallest things, but she thinks he's giving her too much credit, as gardening is an escape from her mother. She knows that her mother has good intentions, but it's hard to live with her, as she keeps insisting she marries. Hades is sure she just wants her to be happy, but Persephone doesn't like how she arranges suitors without her permission. She thinks they're too arrogant, especially Ares, so she wishes they were more like him, since he really listens to her, so she thinks he knows her in a way they never will. Hades confesses that he was in love, but decided to do nothing, just like Seraphim. But one day, Ares goes to see Persephone, and he confronts her, asking her who she's seeing. She thinks she doesn't owe him any explanations, and notices he's drunk, but he shows her a chess piece, and tries to force it on her, so she uses her powers to restrain him. He manages to break free, and he's about to attack her, but Hades intervenes, threatening to kill him if he doesn't leave. Ares realizes she's seeing Hades, and warns him to be careful who he threatens. He tells Ares to leave again, but Ares chooses blood, and tries to attack him, so Hades uses his shadow, and appears behind him. He flies to the sky, as Hades follows him, sending him crashing to the ground. But Ares gets back up, and they charge at each other, but Persephone restrains Ares again, and asks them to stop the fight. Ares decides to leave, but warns that this is just the beginning, and she thanks Hades, saying she's happy that he finally revealed himself to her, and they share a kiss. Later on, he gives her a gift, but explains it's a farewell gift, as he needs to return to the underworld. She wants to go with him, but he mentions Demeter, so she explains that her mother needs to accept what she wants. They start living together, but one day, her mother comes to see her, explaining that she was worried, so Persephone mentions that Hades saved her. Demeter seems confused, and decides to discuss this at home, so she tries to drag her away, but Persephone wants to stay, and reveals she has already chosen her partner. Demeter can't believe this, saying it's not the time to make rash decisions. She thinks Persephone can't live without sunlight, and refuses to let her live in the underworld, but she refuses to leave, as she has already made her decision. She runs to a fruit of the underworld, and remembers that if she eats the pomegranate, she will be bound to the underworld forever. So she eats 6 seeds to stay with Hades, and Demeter can't bear this, so she tells everyone that Persephone was kidnapped by Hades. Hades explains that Demeter destroyed the earth's fields to make Persephone return, and Zeus decided that since she ate 6 seeds, she would spend 6 months with Hades and 6 months with Demeter every year. And since then, whenever she's in the underworld, Demeter makes everyone suffer by making the earth experience winter. But Hades refuses to see his children cry and see her taken from him every year. He thinks Seraphim understands how he feels, so he removes a barrier as he asks Seraphim to follow him. He shows him the souls who can't pay the fare to the underworld, and Seraphim sees his fiancée Gorgo. Hades reminds him that she was going to renounce her vows as a priestess because she wanted to run away with Seraphim. But one day, he found out the whereabouts of his mother's killer and decided to take revenge. She tried to stop him, but he went anyway and ended up turning into a demon. He wonders how she ended up there, but Hades thinks it doesn't matter since he can't change anything. Hades forces him to see her suffering and explains that it's all his fault. Hades asks for his help again and assures him he can end her suffering, so Seraphim finally agrees, but in return, he wants her to drink from the river Lethe to forget him. We see Heron in a dark corridor, holding his mother's amulet, but he's suddenly covered in spiders, and the light goes out as the Moirai appear, asking him why he's running from them. They think there's something he needs to see, and show him that he doesn't have much time left in this world. He wakes up in the middle of the night sweating, but the Moirai appear again, explaining that their temple was attacked during the war, and someone cut his thread of life. They don't understand how this happened, but they explain that since his thread was not cut by them, his death can't be avoided, and he won't die at the right time. He learns that he will die before the solstice, but they also reveal that he could turn this into a blessing, and it's his task to find out how. In the underworld, Hades shows his bident to Seraphim. He calls the bident, and Hades explains that it's better than a sword, since it's also an extension of his will, so the more willpower he has, the more powerful the strike becomes. Hades also offers him a potion, and explains that it will help him go unnoticed, so he drinks it, and his body suddenly begins to change, as he turns back into a human, but Hades explains he still has his demon strength. They take a chariot, and go to another part of the underworld, where Seraphim sees his manticore again. Heron is watching the skies, but he becomes frustrated, and breaks the balcony. Artemis and Asoa watch him, but they think that if he's the chosen one, and his life thread has been cut, they're all in danger. Asoa suddenly draws her sword, and Hermes reveals himself, wondering how she sensed his presence. So she explains that the leaves behind him weren't moving, and he's surprised by her perception. Hestia arrives, and asks Hermes if it's true that Poseidon is seeking a truce. He confirms this, and he's walking the earth to announce to the gods to pay homage to the dead. She thinks they can't relax, since Ares is mobilizing the others to take Zeus's place, and Asoa explains that she can handle Ares, but thinks there's an even greater threat hiding. A crow from Hera is watching Heron, and his friends ask if he's okay, but he ignores them. He reveals that he will pay tribute like the others, but afterward, he will leave forever. He observes his father's statue, and Asoa approaches him, explaining that they celebrate with games when a god passes to honor his life, and she decides to show him. She takes him to the arena, where the gods are competing, explaining that whoever wins the games will receive Zeus's ring and be closer to the throne. Heron explains that he won't compete and wishes her luck, but Ares arrives with Aphrodite to participate. He sees Heron and begins to insult him, explaining that a mortal will never be one of them. He stares at Ares, but he assures Heron that everyone thinks the same, and he's just the only one with the courage to say it. Alexia defends him and reminds Ares of what he did in the war, but Ares warns her to be careful, as she's now in the presence of gods. He blames Heron and his mother for Zeus's death, but Heron reminds him that it was his mother Hera who freed the giants, and they supported her, so he punches Heron. Asoa approaches, but Hades stops the fight, and Heron decides to face Ares in the games. Hades thinks Ares shouldn't have brought his weapon, but he explains that the others need to remember who they are. Hades meets Persephone and tells her that Seraphim has agreed to help them, but Demeter appears and reminds him that this is her time with Persephone, so she takes her away. Later on, we see Heron in one of the trials, but Ares defeats him and thinks he's no match for him. Ares shows his skills with the bow, but Heron manages to hit the center of his arrows. Ares acknowledges it was a good trick, but invites him to go to the arena, where he sees Apollo defeating Dionysus. They prepare to fight, and Alexia tries to stop Heron, but he goes anyway. They face off, and Heron starts attacking, but Ares is stronger and Hera can't defend himself. Ares tells him to surrender, but he refuses. He falls again, and Ares mentions that everyone is excited to see him lose, but Hera begins to channel his power. He gets up and gets behind Ares, managing to land a series of blows. He punches him, making him bleed, and everyone can't believe this is happening. Ares gets angry and hits Hera again, knocking him down, but Hera refuses to give up. So Ares keeps beating him, and Hera sees Zeus's helmet, so he remembers his father. He stares at Ares, but Hera suddenly appears and tells them to stop, since they're not honoring the dead. Alexia helps Hera, and Zeus's sons are irritated by Hera's appearance. Apollo steps forward, but she mentions that she's still the queen of the heavens, so she has the right to be there. She understands that they're angry, and mentions she would trade places with Zeus if she could. She wants to make amends for what she did, so she declares that she will exile herself from Olympus for 1,000 years, but first she wants to pay her respects. Apollo thinks she has no right, so Ares becomes angry, thinking bastards can't rule Olympus, and reminds everyone that Hera only lost control because Zeus betrayed her. Asola tells Ares that Hera should obey the gods, but Ares explains that he isn't asking for permission. Hera decides to leave, but Ares threatens to start a fight, so he and Apollo face off. But a tree suddenly sprouts from the ground, and it transforms into Gaia. Everyone is shocked to see her, and Hera realizes she's the woman who appeared in his dreams. Gaia acknowledges that Hera came in truce, so she can pay her respects, but afterward, she must fulfill her word and leave. Gaia thinks remembering death is important, so they will mourn Zeus's death for 3 days, and no god can fight during this period. But after 3 days, there will be a challenge, and the winner will receive the Alcinian stone, as well as the right to rule, so the most deserving will rule the heavens. She tells them to pay their respects, and she disappears. Hera is the first, and she places a bit of her hair on Zeus's altar. Poseidon also offers his tribute, and each god pays their respects. Hermes shows Zeus's soul, and Hera kneels before him, but he thinks she doesn't need to cry, and praises his children for their loyalty. He thanks them for their help, and explains to Ares that the future must be decided by merit, so he shouldn't waste his talents. He addresses Hera, and admits he's proud of him, so he offers him his ring. But Hera thinks it should be given to someone who wants to rule, so Zeus explains that it's not about the throne, but about understanding that he's his son. Hera is moved, so he accepts the ring, as Zeus explains that they're all flawed, but must strive for perfect ideals. So he asks them to honor him by ending this conflict and living as he died, in pursuit of something greater. Hermes collects Zeus's soul, placing it in his horn, and he runs to the underworld. Hera looks at the ring, and he reveals that Gaia asked him to find Zeus's sword and save Seraphim, so they're shocked, wondering why she asked him to save Seraphim. We see Zeus in the underworld, and Charon's boat arrives to take him to judgment, but he asks to go somewhere else first. He goes through a wheat field to find Electra, and they hug each other, but she slaps him because he should have told her about Seraphim. He agrees with her and laments all the suffering he caused. She wonders if he will stay with her, but he doesn't think so, and explains that he will be judged, so she cries before he goes. Meanwhile, Hera goes to his hometown and sees the destruction caused by the demons. They continue walking, and Hera finds the place where his mother died. They go to his house, where Hera has memories of his childhood, and he goes inside to find adamantium, but notices that the sack is empty. He sees something in the fireplace and discovers a lock, so he uses his ring to open a secret passage, and he jumps into it. Zeus's judgment begins, and the kings show his deeds, thinking he was unbeatable on the battlefield, and poets will always speak of him. But they mention his infidelity is a stain, and it will also bring him shame forever. But they reveal that there's another issue that needs to be resolved, as Hades stands up, and he wonders if the day of the choice of realms was fair. But Zeus assures him that it was, so he goes down and asks Hera if she wants to tell everyone the truth. He mentions that there's no escaping the truth in the underworld, and shows that when they were disputing the Alcinian stone, Zeus felt something wrong, but he didn't say anything. We learn that Hera influenced the lottery, and he knew this was the case, but he didn't want to give up power, so he went along with it. Hades explains that Zeus remained silent because it was convenient, but Hera protests, explaining that Zeus had nothing to do with it. She admits that she did it, but she mentions that it was for the greater good, saying she did it for everyone, as only Zeus was worthy to rule over the gods. She reminds the gods that he saved them from Cronus and led the wars, besides defeating the beast that must not be named. The kings add a coin to the balance, and she continues to comment that only Zeus was worthy of the stone's power. So she refused to leave it to chance, as there was too much at stake, and she reveals that Poseidon also knew. Poseidon admits it's true, and Hera reminds them that Zeus also sacrificed himself to save her, so the kings think about this, and they add more coins to the balance. Heron walks through a dark corridor, and he finds a door, revealing an image of Zeus, who declares that he has finally returned home as a new man. He's shocked to hear this, and Zeus explains that he gathered all his knowledge there before he died. He reveals that only one person will save them when the evil they never name returns, and he thinks that that person is Heron. He mentions that time will tell, and he disappears, but Heron wonders if he has time. He returns to the surface and tells Alexia that they still have to go to the mountain to find adamantium, as Evios finds a trail of blood, so they decide to follow it. Meanwhile, Hades thinks Hera is a fool for defending Zeus, and explains that he visited Electra before his judgment. He mentions that Zeus never controlled himself, even though it caused suffering to others, and he talks about Seraphim, wondering why Zeus never took him to Electra. Zeus remains silent, as Hades explains that he wanted Electra only for his son and himself, and Seraphim paid for Zeus's hatred of his father. Zeus admits that he didn't let him die, but didn't save him either, so the kings add more weight to the scales, and it condemns him guilty. They explain that Zeus's fate is obvious, and ask if he regrets it. He declares that he does, so they explain that his fate will be decided by those who remain in the world, and if they perform good deeds in his name, he can be forgiven. But until then, he needs to stay in Tartarus. Hades goes with him and imprisons Zeus, explaining that he brought this upon himself. Heron and the others see several dead bodies, and they wonder what happened. Hermes arrives to collect their souls, and explains that they were attacked by the Keres. Alexia mentions they only feed on the dead, but Hermes reveals that after Zeus's death, they stopped following his decrees, so they now attack the living. Evios thinks they should seek shelter, and Hermes mentions that as the patron of thieves, he will warn them that Evios' former partner escaped from prison, but they can't believe she managed to leave the island. Hermes bids them farewell, and wishes Heron luck. Evios thinks he needs to go, so Alexia asks him why, but he avoids the question, and only mentions that he needs to find his old associate. He says goodbye to everyone, but Kofi explains that he will stay with Alexia and Heron. Evios asks if he's crazy, but Kofi believes in Gaia, so he thinks he should help. Evios pulls him aside, and tries to say that he can help after finding that person, explaining that he already helped Heron save the world once, so he doesn't need to do this. Evios tells him to stop thinking that he's being watched by that person, but Kofi becomes upset, so he leaves him alone. Evios apologizes for what he said, but still doesn't want to die, so he decides to leave. We see Hades as he watches Seraphim through an owl. He tells Seraphim to go west after Corinth, but he explains that he needs to stop somewhere first. Hades mentions that they don't have time, but Seraphim kills the owl. He stops in a forest, and we see a creature known as the Treebender, which is chopping up humans. He prepares to eat one, and he asks Seraphim if he wants to cross the bridge. So he mentions that he does, but the Treebender warns him that he needs to solve his riddle, and if he gets it wrong, he will end up getting eaten. The Treebender asks him if he's sure, but Seraphim wonders if he will really let him pass if he gets it right. He thinks the Treebender will go back on his word, calling him a coward, as Seraphim mentions that he broke his oath when he ate a priestess. So he smiles, and admits that he remembers her. We see Gorgo finding the Treebender, and she offers to answer the riddle, but he must spare the man he's about to eat. He wonders why she wants to risk her life for him, so she explains that no one deserves such a death. So he decides to tell the riddle, and asks what's greater than the gods, and worse than the titans, something the poor have, but the rich don't, and if you eat, you will die. She hesitates, so he prepares to kill the man, but she answers nothing, and the Treebender knows that she got the right answer, but he kills the man anyway. She becomes shocked, and the Treebender chases after her, but she suddenly falls, and he ends her life. Seraphim is furious, thinking she was too smart for the game, and explains that she was his fiancée who was looking for him, and now she's suffering in the underworld. Seraphim asks him why he killed her, but he mentions that it's his nature, so Seraphim is enraged, and he shows his demon form. The tree bender throws a log at him, but he uses the bident to pierce his knee, climbing on top of him and stabbing his ear. Seraphim curses his nature, throwing the bident at him, and he's knocked off the cliff. Seraphim's wound opens up, so he treats it, but he sees Gorgo's cloth, and remembers how she saved him when he was injured. He returns to his mission, but takes a part of her clothes with him. Heron's party goes to the mountain, where he mined the adamantium, but he discovers that someone has taken it all. They hear the villagers' screams, and Heron remembers that some of them attacked his mother. But Alexia doesn't think they can let the Cures kill them, and Heron seems to hesitate, but he decides to help. They go to the mines where the villagers are hiding, and someone approaches them, but it's just a girl, so they try to help her, but she ends up dying. They enter the mine, and they find a group of Cures feeding on the villagers. The Cures attack them with great speed, and Heron manages to cut one, but they get rid of the torch, so Heron and the others can't defend themselves against the attacks. But Heron uses his powers, and shoots lightning from his hands, killing 2 of the Cures. He leaves one alive, and warns it to tell the others to follow Zeus's decree, or else he will hunt them down. They pay their respects to the girl, and the other villagers suddenly appear. They go to thank him, but Heron recognizes one of them, knowing he's one of the men who attacked his mother. But he's with his daughter, and she gives him a flower as a sign of gratitude. An officer suddenly appears, greeting Alexia, and he also greets Heron, saying he has heard of his deeds, and thinks the villagers owe him an eternal debt. But Heron explains that he didn't do it for them, and asks them to give the girls a proper funeral. He asks them where his mother was buried, and the officer explains that they didn't find her body. Alexia thinks Zeus buried her in a special place, and the officer mentions where they bury their heroes, as it's the closest thing to a sacred place. Heron knows where it is, so he walks away, as the villagers treat him as their hero. Meanwhile, Seraphim bleeds as he rides his manticore, and he ends up fainting, falling into the forest, and he returns to his human form. Hades sends another owl to find him, and declares that he won't disappoint Persephone, but the ground begins to tremble, and her tree breaks apart. He's shocked to see this, and Demeter appears, revealing that she knows about his plan to steal the Alcinian stone, and she wonders what the others would think of this. He asks her what she wants, and she mentions that she only wants the best for Persephone, but she would be devastated if Hades died, so she's willing to help him. She promises not to tell anyone, but has a condition, saying she wants to rule with them after they conquer the throne of the heavens, and they can finally be together as a family. Alexia sees an injured man, so they go to help him, and realize he's almost dead. She mentions that they need to cauterize the wound, so Heron uses his lightning to stop the bleeding. Seraphim suddenly wakes up, and he's shocked to see Heron again. He rushes to get up, and tries to call the bident, but realizes he's in his human form again, as the 3 wonder what happened, but Seraphim suddenly faints. Alexia notices he has lost a lot of blood, so she doesn't know if he will survive. Heron asks to do their best for him, and they go to pay their respects, as Heron sees his mother's tomb. Seraphim wakes up, and sees Heron in the cemetery, so he approaches from behind to attack him, but suddenly sees Zeus's symbol, and realizes it's his mother's tomb. Heron prays to his mother, as he laments that he can't help Seraphim, who sees the amulet, so he remembers Electra. He puts away the dagger, and Heron is glad to see he's better, asking him what happened. So Seraphim explains that he fought with the tree bender, and he notices Heron's wound, so he mentions that he defeated a group of Cures. Heron introduces himself, so Seraphim calls himself Icarus. Alexia and Kofi arrive, and she asks what he was doing in the woods, so he explains that he came to pay tribute to an Artemis priestess, but hasn't found her tomb yet. Alexia thinks they can help him, so Seraphim mentions her name, and they decide to look for her tomb, as Kofi notices that he seems to be in a lot of pain. Heron finds the tomb, and lets Seraphim pay his respects. He cries as he asks for forgiveness, and he promises to free her from her pain. He prepares to leave, and tells Heron not to blame himself for his mother's death. Heron becomes suspicious, wondering how he knows it's his mother's tomb, but Alexia interrupts him, saying Elias did well to bury her there. So Heron remembers Elias, and he runs to his mother's tomb, realizing that he used the adamantium he mined on the flowers. So he puts the ore in the compass, and it points to the location of the sword. They notice that Seraphim has disappeared, and we see him calling the bident. He sees a group of poachers trying to capture his manticore, so he kills them all before leaving, and Hades finds him. Alexia wonders what happened in the cave, because Heron seems different after using his power. He admits that the power is unlike anything he has ever felt, and now he understands why Seraphim didn't want to give up his power to become human again. He suddenly has a vision of an angel, and she introduces herself as Iris, the messenger of the primordial gods. She hands him a scroll and explains that he must participate as Zeus's son. It turns out to be Gaia's challenge, and he opens a map. Hades also receives the message and tells Seraphim that he has lost his advantage by wasting time, because now all the gods know the details of the challenge and can go to the hidden realm to find the stone guarded by the eagle. Hades tells him to be faster and explains that he will send the Oniroi to help him, so he promises not to fail. Demeter thinks Hades is losing control because he fulfilled his duty, expecting everyone to reward his virtues, but she explains that the gods don't care about that. She mentions how they toy with mortals and betray each other, saying they only care about power. She reveals that she has a plan to weaken the others and ensure they win the challenge. She explains that there are only two ways to gain power: they can either get stronger or they weaken their enemies. She uses the solar mechanism and redirects the ray to the earth, helping the plants to grow as they begin to spread a mist. She tells him that their spores will spread parasites, which will use the host's body to reproduce and burst more spores. She reveals that this will kill mortals and weaken the other gods, but Hades thinks she can't do this. But she explains that she already did and says that all greatness comes at a cost, so he must pay the price for it, and suggests he think of his family. Heron hurries to recover the sword, and he sees the cloud of spores ahead. The sword is close, so he asks them to prepare to face Talos, but an Amazon ship appears. They wonder what they're doing there, when something moves in the water, and Talos suddenly appears. The Amazons try to stop him, but he breaks the sail and destroys the ship. Talos attacks Kofi, causing him to fall, so Heron attacks with a lightning bolt, but it grabs Pegasus, and Heron is thrown into the sea. A Hydra suddenly appears, and it swims inside Talos as Alexia flies above him, and she sees the sword glowing in his eye. He throws the boat at her, but she manages to avoid it, and she jumps into its eye, where she finds the sword. Heron gets on Kofi's Pegasus as Alexia jumps to the sword, trying to pull it out. Talos tries to grab Heron, but the Amazons shoot a harpoon into his other eye, which nearly hits Alexia and causes her to fall. Talos loses control as Alexia falls into the water, but she sees the Hydra circling her. Heron continues fighting with his lightning, and Alexia tries to kill the Hydra, but its heads just grow back. Kofi jumps into the eye and grabs the sword, but he sees Alexia struggling, so he takes the sword and jumps into the water to help her. The Hydra grabs Kofi, so Alexia takes the sword and cuts off all the heads at once. Talos tries to crush Heron with his hand, but Alexia uses the sword to destroy his core, causing his chest to explode. Another Amazon ship arrives, and they pull Heron's party out of the sea. Alexia gives the sword to Heron, but he feels sad thinking about Zeus. An Amazon calls Alexia, and she realizes it's her mother Chrysanthe, so she runs to hug her. She asks what they were doing, so Chrysanthe explains that Talos was sinking their ships, so they assembled a fleet to destroy him. She introduces Heron and Kofi to her, but she feels that nothing makes sense anymore. She believes the world is restless, and thinks about the Kires eating the living, and Talos attacking ships, thinking that even the treebender isn't safe. Heron asks her about the treebender, so she reveals that he was attacked by a bident and was thrown into the same abyss he sent his victims. Alexia wonders who could kill him, and Chrysanthe reveals that a witness saw the culprit flying with a chimera. Alexia thinks it was Seraphim, and Heron remembers what Icarus said, so he realizes he was Seraphim. Kofi notes how Heron saved him just like Gaia predicted, but Alexia wonders how he escaped the underworld. Heron thinks Hades must have helped him, since he was the one who encouraged him to eat the giant. Kofi wonders what Hades wants, and Heron thinks he wants power, so he's looking for the Alcinian stone. Meanwhile, Asoa sees the ray of sunlight coming from the underworld, and thinks Hades is planning something. Hermes also sees it, so he runs to investigate, but gets caught by the spores and runs back to the beach. Asoa confronts Persephone and asks what her husband is doing. She assures her she knows nothing, but Asoa thinks she's lying and threatens to find out by force, as Persephone mentions she has nothing to tell her. Seraphim finally reaches the island, and he finds the gate to the hidden realm. Hades tells him to hurry, as the Oniroi appear behind him. We see a group of soldiers guarding the gate, and the Oniroi draw their attention, so they go to check it out. Seraphim uses this chance to reach their water supply, and takes out a flask containing the waters of the river Lethe, which is capable of erasing memories. He pours it into the canteen, as they return after finding nothing, and they drink the water from the river, so they suddenly become confused. Seraphim appears to them, so they draw their swords, and ask who he is. But Seraphim introduces himself as the god of the mind, calling himself Nobody, and explains that he came to help with their problem, since he knows they can't remember anything. He promises to help them remember, so he uses the Oniroi to give them dreams, as he declares that they're the Kurets, the ones created by Gaia to protect Zeus when he was born. They see the Titan King Kronos eating his children, to prevent them from taking his throne, and also banishing the primordial giants to Tartarus because they were too strong. But when Zeus is born, his mother joins Gaia to save him. She takes him to a safe place, as his mother and Hecate use stones to pass off as a baby and deceive Kronos. Gaia raises Zeus with them, and they help her hide him from Kronos. They train Zeus and become the loyal guards of the future king of the gods, so Seraphim tells them to continue guarding the entrance. He explains that others will come to enter the gate, telling them to say that nobody entered. He goes to the gate and places his hand to open it, but nothing happens. So the Kurets become suspicious, but a light suddenly runs through his body, and he manages to open the gate. Hermes is woken up by Apollo, and he's also infected by the spores. He helps Hermes get up, and thinks that this is Hera's doing, since she always hated them for being bastards. We see Demeter watching this, and she also observes Ares and Aphrodite, who are also sick, but they decide to go to the challenge. Persephone asks her mother what she did, but she explains she only did what was necessary. Persephone wonders if Hades knows, so Demeter lies and says that it was his idea, which leaves her shocked, while Asoa listens to their conversation. Seraphim arrives at the hidden realm, as Hades explains that he will undergo 3 challenges, and the new king of the gods must be wise, courageous, and able to unravel mysteries. Gorgo suddenly appears to him and tries to make him stop, but he knows she isn't real, so she transforms into Hecate, and she tells him he isn't supposed to be there. But she still decides to help him, and mentions that she's willing to turn back time for him to change a moment in his life. She shows him the moment when he left Gorgo, telling him he can save her, or even go back to stop his uncle, and finally become a king. She asks what he thinks, but Seraphim refuses, and mentions that not even a witch goddess can undo what has been done. So he knows this is part of the challenge, since a wise king must forget the past. A dragon suddenly attacks him, so he dodges its fire, and he tries to fight back, but he ends up getting hit by its tail. He gets up and charges at the dragon, calling his bident to strike the creature, and he manages to defeat it. Hades asks what's going on, as the statues let him pass, so he explains that he has won the first challenge. Heron also arrives at the island, and sees the Kurets guarding the gate, as Alexia explains that no one gets past them. He decides to present himself to them, as they form up, but Heron shows them Zeus's ring, so they lower their swords. He asks if anyone has entered, so they tell him nobody has, but Kofi shows him the footprints. Meanwhile, Seraphim is confronted by a Sphinx, asking if he has the courage to pass, and explains that to enter the labyrinth, he must first open a box that contains his greatest fear. But Seraphim laughs at this, because he has already lost everything he loved, so he no longer feels loss or fear. He opens the box, and it's empty, so she lets him pass. He enters the labyrinth, but the walls suddenly begin to move, as the Sphinx appears, saying he still fears disappointing those he loves, and he ends up getting trapped. Heron realizes that the footprints belong to Seraphim, so he asks if their owner has entered the hidden realm, and the Kurets confirm this. He tries to pass, but the Kurets stop him, telling him he needs to prove himself, so they point their weapons at Alexia and Kofi, threatening to kill them if he can't open the door. So he tries to open it, but he can't, and he tries to use his powers, but the door barely moves. The Kurets start to approach, but Alexia is confident he can open it. He sees the mark of Zeus's ring, so he places it there, and the gate opens. Heron enters, but the door closes behind him, and we see Hades watching him. He tells Seraphim that Heron has entered, so he advises him to hurry, but he's having trouble, trying to use the bident to escape the labyrinth. Hades decides it's time to go, and he takes the underworld army with him. Meanwhile, Asoa meets with Apollo and Hermes, and she knows Demeter is listening. So she mentions that they're right, and Hera is using the spores to attack those conceived outside of marriage, and Demeter is pleased to hear this. But Asoa steps on her root, preventing her from listening, as she reveals the truth, explaining that Demeter is the one behind it. After that, they go to Persephone, and they ask her about her mother, but she explains that she doesn't know, and tries to flee, but she's surrounded by the other gods. Heron reaches the Sphinx, and she asks what he fears most, so he admits that he fears not having a good death. But the Sphinx wonders if that's all, and asks him to prove it by opening the box. So he opens it, and something suddenly seems to enter him. He returns to the day Seraphim killed his mother, but he has Zeus's sword, so he uses it to kill the demons. He hears the Sphinx's voice, as she mentions what he truly fears, saying he knows that a good death won't be enough to atone for his mistake. She explains that if he hadn't given in to his anger, he would have had the sword to fight Seraphim, and would have prevented his mother's death. It would also have saved countless lives, and the war wouldn't have happened, and Zeus would still be alive. But she lets him pass, and explains that he still needs to find the key to a good death. He enters the labyrinth, but the walls begin to close again, so he uses the sword to carve a path, and Seraphim hears that he's near. Heron manages to reach the eagle first, and it has the stone tied to it. But Gaia suddenly appears, and declares that he has lived up to the faith she had in him, but he has one final challenge to face. She explains that Zeus knew the others would never accept the king after him, so they used him to show everyone's flaws, saying Zeus wanted to teach the gods forgiveness. She thinks they only know penance and reparation, but forgiveness is the only thing that can unite everyone, because it eliminates evil without causing pain. She explains how Heron has been blaming Seraphim, but in truth, he was angry at himself. So she tells him that if he forgives himself before his time runs out, then he really is the chosen one from the prophecy, but she adds that it could also be his brother. She suddenly disappears, and Seraphim is right in front of him. He asks Heron not to stop him, and Heron thinks it doesn't have to be this way, asking him why he's helping Hades. So he explains that Hades promised to end the suffering of his fiancée, saying he doesn't care what happens to him, as long as he saves her. He throws his bident, releasing the eagle, and he attacks it, but Heron stops him with a lightning bolt. So he attacks Heron instead, knocking him down, and he hits the eagle, but ends up destroying the ceiling, so the eagle flies away. Heron runs to catch it, and the eagle falls wounded on the beach as Hades arrives with his army. The Kurets prepare to fight, and at the same time, Ares arrives, as Asoa and the other gods also appear, and we see that they have captured Persephone. Hades demands that they release her, as Seraphim and Heron see everyone gathered. Hera suddenly arrives to stop the fight, saying war won't bring justice, asking them to think of everyone before shedding blood, so they won't make the same mistake that she made. But Hades sees the stone, and he thinks of Persephone, thinking war is the only way to undo what has been done. Hera withdraws from the battle, as Hades declares war, and everyone starts fighting. He throws the bident to release Persephone, as Demeter stops Asoa with her vines, but she orders the other gods to attack, as Persephone is reunited with Hades. Seraphim runs to the stone, and throws his bident at one of the Kurets, but Hermes sees this, so he uses the opportunity to take the stone. He receives a surge of power, and starts running across the battlefield with incredible speed. Hades realizes he took the stone, so he uses his shadow to attack from above, but Hermes is able to avoid him. He's about to give the stone to Asoa, but Aphrodite sends a hurricane towards them, and Hermes is caught, and he gets thrown to the ground, and he's hit by Ares' hammer. Ares sees the Alcinian stone, but Seraphim is ready to fight for it. Aphrodite is trapped by vines, and the two charge to take the stone, but Heron interrupts them. Seraphim looks at his brother, but Demeter attacks him from behind, and she uses him to make Heron surrender. She takes the stone, but before she can touch it, there's something in the water, and Poseidon joins the fight, sweeping her off the battlefield. Heron is ready to take the stone, but a shadow is about to attack him, so Seraphim saves him. Everyone charges at him as he touches the stone, and the power causes a massive explosion. It creates a lightning storm that affects the battlefield, and even Ares can't get close to him. He's overwhelmed by the power, and he sees Hera, so Seraphim tells him to kill her so that they can avenge their mother. He thinks about what she did, but he shoots his lightning into the sky and decides not to take revenge. A shadow attacks him, but he immediately eliminates it, and he tells Hera not to mistake his mercy for weakness. Gaia is pleased, and Heron explains that he's willing to forgive everything, but asks Hades to fulfill his promise to Seraphim. Hades hesitates, but he gives Seraphim the water from the Lethe River. Ares refuses to accept Heron, wondering why he should listen to a bastard, so Poseidon becomes angry, but Heron repeats that he doesn't want any more conflict. He mentions that they must restore order, with the gods returning to Olympus and Hades to the underworld. But Hades is saddened as he thinks of Persephone, so he asks for forgiveness, and he stabs Heron. He drops the stone, and everyone is shocked, and Alexia runs to him as Hades takes the stone. Heron dies, but the ground suddenly begins to move, trapping Hades, as Gaia appears furious, saying that none of them deserve the power. She curses Zeus and his infidelity, and Hera for starting a war. She mentions how Hades betrayed a brave hero, while his allies poisoned the world, so she thinks they deserve what's about to happen next. She decides to speak the name of the evil that no one can mention, and hopes that it brings the destruction of the gods. She screams the name Typhon, and the power inside the stone begins to react. The stone shatters, and the energy returns to the body under Mount Etna, and the greatest evil they've ever known rises once more. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.